In the last video, we created a table called users and we added in a bunch of users to it. In this video, we're going to focus on different ways we can write this MySQL query, and we're going to learn a few different commands that we can use. Now, before we do that, we should make sure that our query is nice and structured so it's as easy as possible to read. Now, MySQL Workbench has a button that does that automatically for us. It's this beautify/reformat button. When you press this button, it'll automatically restructure your code just to make it a little bit easier to read. Okay, another thing I like to do is I like to indent the from statement just to make it a little bit clear that we're selecting from this table. This makes it a little bit nicer to read when you have really big and nasty queries. Now what we'll start with is we'll start with learning how we can select more specific columns from our table. At the moment, the query says to select all. The little star there represents all of the columns. If we put a star here, it's asking the database for all of the columns from the users table. If we'd like to select a specific column here, we would replace the star with whatever the column name is. So for example, here I've just said select name. So that's just going to select the name column from the table. Let's execute it, and you can see that we've only gathered the name column. If we'd like to specify another column, we just have to put a comma next to it and then write the name of another column, so email. Let's run the query again, and now you can see we have all of the names and all of the emails. So the very first part of a query is telling the database what columns we would like to extract from the table. And this information is always placed after the select command. So it'll always say select and then the columns names separated by a comma. Now, after we choose our columns, we have to say to MySQL what table we'd like to take those columns from. So we say select these columns from this table. Now you'll notice it says simple site dot users because the users table is located inside of the simple site schema. Now there is a way that we can avoid having to constantly write simple site dot before our users table by telling MySQL that we intend to constantly use the simple site schema. The way we can do that is we go up before our select statement and we write use simple site. That's telling MySQL that all of our queries will be in relation to the simple site schema. Now again, just like normal programming languages, a semicolon denotes the end of that particular line of code. So in MySQL, it's also important to put semicolons after whatever the command is that you're entering. Now that we've used the use statement up here, we can remove the simple site dot and the query should do exactly the same thing. Okay, so now that we've extracted some information from our table, let's learn how to order it. Now it's really easy to order in MySQL. After the from statement, you just need to put another command that says order by. Then after the order by statement, you just need to write whatever column you'd like it to order by. So I'll just write name, and it should order all of our users by their name, and by default it should do it in ascending order. And there you go, ascending order. If we'd like descending order, then I just have to write a space next to the column name, which is name, and then I write des for descending. And now we should see the names should be ordered in descending order. Simple as that. If we wanted to do a more complicated ordering, let's introduce the age range to our query. And maybe because we have some duplicate age range, so see Michael and Daniel, they have the same age range, we could first order by the age range and then we could order by the name of the user. So to do that, what I would write first is I would say first order by the age range, and we'll do it in ascending order, and then order by the name of the user, and we'll do that in descending order. Let's see what happens. So you can see the age range is ordered in ascending order from smallest to largest. And since Michael and Daniel have the same age range, what's happened is that Michael and Daniel, they've been ordered in descending order because of this command. So first it orders by the age range in ascending order, and then afterwards it will order by the name in descending order. If we change this to ascending, then it'll show Daniel, then Michael. Daniel, then Michael. Cool. And that's it. That's how you order in MySQL. All right, now what if we didn't want to find all of the users, but instead we only wanted the first three? Now the way we can do that is we can add in another command, and it's called the limit command. So we write limit, and then next to it we just write how many users we want to gather. So if I write 3 next to it, it's going to get me the first 3 users. So you can see after I execute it, I've only got the first 3 users. If I change the 3 to a 1, it should get me only the first user. Another thing that we can do is we can have MySQL get us not the first user, but the second and third user. So we'd have to slightly adjust the syntax here. We have to say start with the second user, so we would put a 1 there, and then we'll put a comma next to it and a 2 to say give me 2 users afterwards. So if we press run this time, you'll see we get the second user and the third user. So this syntax tells the query where to start limiting and how many to go forward by. If I change this to 10, this will give me all of the users except the first user, because we're starting at index 1, not at index 0. If I change that to 0, that would include the very first user. So these limit commands, they're responsible for all of the search functionality, all of the search constraints that you might see on social media or e-commerce websites. Whenever you limit or extend your search range, it's just going to be adjusting this query very slightly. All right, the last command we're going to focus on is the where command. And we touched on this a little bit in the previous video, but I didn't really talk much about it. Now, this is the most important part of a query and can be the most complex and confusing. Now, we're not going to do anything too hard. We're going to do some really basic where commands, but I'll explain a bunch of different logic that you can use. So first, what I'm going to do is I'm going to add in a where command, and the where command should go after the from. So add in a where command, I'll say where, and I'm going to say where the name is equal to Daniel. So what this is going to do is it's going to select the name, the email, the age range from the users table where the name is equal to Daniel. Now you can see there's only one row here where the name is equal to Daniel. So hopefully this is the row we see. Perfect. So I've only selected one user whose name matches this where condition. Now it's worth mentioning that the way that I've told MySQL to search for the name Daniel is by placing single quotation marks around the name Daniel. This is the MySQL syntax for strings. It's just a single quotation. Okay, let's make this a little bit more complicated. Let's say that we want to find users whose name are Daniel or Jessica. The way we can amend our where statement is by adding in an or operator. So we just literally write the word or, and then we say what we want. We want or the name to equal to Jessica. We'll run it, and now you can see that we have 2 users that match our criteria. This works, but for example, if we had 10 names we wanted to include, we would literally have to write or name equals over and over and over. An alternative to this is we could write name in open bracket Daniel, comma, Jessica. That basically does exactly the same thing. So this is going to search for users whose name is either Daniel or Jessica. And if we wanted to add in more names, we could literally just write in names with commas next to them. This is called an in statement. Let's see what happens. And you can see we get the two users once more. The last operator I want to show you is the AND operator. So for example, what if we wanted to find a user whose name is Daniel and whose age range is 26? So what I would write here is I would write name equals Daniel again, but this time instead of or, I would write and age range equals to 26. So just like a normal programming language, the AND operator will return true if both of these statements are true. So we're only going to see rows which have both of these properties. If we run it, you can see that Daniel user shows up. If we change the age, maybe we'll make it 28, doesn't show up anymore because there are no users which satisfy both of these conditions simultaneously. Okay, that's the AND operator. Now this logic can get really complicated, but just like normal programming languages, you can separate logic in MySQL with brackets. Okay, so I've just added in an extra OR statement. First, it'll look for somebody whose name is Daniel and whose name is 28. Otherwise, it'll just grab a user whose name is Jessica. So you can see we only grab Jessica here because both of these need to be true since they're linked with this AND. And this statement will be checked first because it's inside of the brackets. Now before we end this video, I just want to talk a little bit about the order that we've written this query and also the order that MySQL will execute our commands. Now the order that I wrote the query is very important. First we had to write the select, then the from, then the where, then the order, then the limit. If I wrote any of these commands out of this order, it wouldn't execute. It wouldn't accept it. So the order that we wrote this query was very important. But this isn't necessarily the order that MySQL will execute our instructions. What actually happens is first MySQL looks at the from statement and it goes and it gets the users table. Then after that, it'll execute the where. So it'll go through the users table and only gather the rows that satisfy the where statement. Then after that, it'll go over to the select and it'll extract the relevant columns that we'd like to see from our table. And then it'll order them according to whatever our ordering is specified as. And finally, it would apply the limit. It's very important that you kind of get a good idea about the order that these things are executed, because if you have really huge databases and really complicated queries, you really need to be careful how you write them. Because if you write them in a kind of not very thought out way, your queries could take a very long time to execute. Whereas if you just think about what you're doing and make sure you're working with the smallest tables as possible, then your queries can execute quite a lot faster. In the next video, we're going to start to learn how we can get PHP to interact with this MySQL database and how we can start loading the users into our web page.